The eyes in the photograph were wrong. They shouldn't have been able to track me as I moved across the room, yet they did. I closed the file folder and still felt them watching through the manila paper. "You not going to finish the report, Dr. Lawrence?" Nurse Collins asked from the doorway. I hadn't heard her enter. "You won't believe what happened next. Watch until the end." The basement archives of Holloway Psychiatric Hospital smelled of mildew and chemical preservatives. April 1952, and I'd only been employed at the facility for 3 weeks. The administrators had assigned me to digitize old case files, busy work for the new psychiatrist. Most cases were mundane: depression, hysteria, the occasional schizophrenia misdiagnosis. But this file, patient Napashra 437, was different. I'd found it misfiled, tucked behind a radiator pipe, its edges warped from decades of humidity. The folder had a single name scrawled across it: Thomas Bell, Kentucky, 1921. Inside was one photograph and 17 pages of handwritten notes. No official documentation, no medical records, no admission forms. "I'm nearly finished, Nurse Collins, just getting acquainted with our institutional history." She didn't move from the doorway. "That's not one of the assigned file." "I know, I found it by accident." "Do you know anything about this case? Thomas Bell?" Her face tightened. "We don't discuss that one, Dr. Lawrence. Director's orders. But it's over 30 years old. Surely return it where you found it and continue with your assigned work." After she left, I slipped the file into my briefcase. Something about her reaction, about the boy's eyes in that photograph, demanded investigation. Besides, I'd come to Holloway to study unusual psychiatric phenomena, not to alphabetize decades-old paperwork. My apartment was small, but functional, 15 minutes from the hospital. That evening, I spread the file contents across my kitchen table and examined them properly. The photograph showed a gaunt boy, perhaps 14 years old, seated in what appeared to be a hospital room. 2 men in white coats stood in the background, their faces blurred as if they'd moved during exposure. The boy's face was the only clear element, unnaturally so, as though it had been photographed separately and superimposed. His features were disconcerting. His skull seemed slightly elongated, his eye sockets too large, skin stretched taut across prominent cheekbones. But those eyes, cloudy white with pinpoint pupils that seemed to absorb light rather than reflect it. The handwritten notes were equally disturbing. They belonged to a Dr. Samuel Harper, detailing observations from March to September 1921. The first entry read, "So March 12, 1921, T.B. arrived today. Parents claim child was born normal, but began developing unusual features around age 3. Current physical anomalies defy medical explanation. Subject exhibits extreme sensitivity to light, abnormal pupillary response, and cranial formation inconsistent with known pathologies. Most colleagues refuse to examine the subject. Some won't even enter the room." I continued reading. According to Harper's notes, Thomas Bell's condition wasn't simply physical. Patients in nearby rooms reported identical dreams after his arrival. Staff complained of hearing whispers when alone with him, though the boy's mouth never moved. One nurse resigned after claiming she saw her own face temporarily transform into Bell's when looking in a mirror. Harper's entries grew increasingly unscientific as months passed. June 8th. T.B. spoke today. First time since admission, asked only, "Do you know what waits?" Voice unusually deep for adolescent male. 3 patients in adjacent ward became hysterical simultaneously, though could not possibly have heard him. July 22nd, found orderly Michaels staring at T-Bade for over an hour. When interrupted, Michaels appeared disoriented, claimed only minutes had passed. T-Bubin's eyes tracked me throughout interaction, though his head remained stationary. The final entry was dated September 4th, 1921. Patient manifested previously undocumented symptoms last night. Dr. Reynolds and I witnessed. The entry ended mid-sentence. The remaining pages were blank. I rubbed my eyes, suddenly aware of how quiet my apartment was. Outside, rain had begun falling, droplets tapping against the window like impatient fingers. The telephone rang, startling me. It was 11:47 p.m. Hello? Nothing but static. Then a voice so faint I pressed the receiver hard against my ear. Return it. Who is this? The line went dead. I replaced the receiver with an unsteady hand. Coincidence? Surely. Nurse Collins had probably mentioned the missing file to someone who decided to play a prank. That night, I dreamed of Kentucky in 1921, though I'd never been there. I walked through hospital corridors that twisted impossibly, always leading back to a single room. Inside sat Thomas Bell, older than in the photograph, but with the same unsettling eyes. He spoke without moving his lips. They wouldn't record it. Will you? I woke at 3:17 a.m., sheets damp with sweat. On my bedside table sat a notepad I didn't recognize. Written on it in my handwriting were the words, "Do you know what waits?" The next morning, I arrived at Holloway early. The dream and notepad had unsettled me, but daylight restored my rational mind. I likely wrote the note myself, influenced by reading the file before bed. As for the dream, well, dreams often incorporate recent experiences. I decided to research Thomas Bell properly. If he'd been a patient at Holloway, there would be administrative records, even if his medical file was incomplete. The main records room was on the 3rd floor, accessible only to senior staff. Fortunately, I'd befriended Walter, the elderly clerk who managed the archives. Morning, Walter. Need to check something from the 1920s intake records. Walter peered at me over wire-rimmed glasses. Anything specific? Patient named Thomas Bell, admitted March 1921. The color drained from Walter's face. Where did you hear that name? Found an old file in the basement, incomplete, just trying to fill in the gaps. Walter glanced around before leaning closer. Listen to me carefully, Dr. Lawrence. There's no official record of that patient. Never was. That's impossible. Dr. Harper kept detailed notes. Harper disappeared in September 21, along with Dr. Reynolds and the patient. My stomach tightened. What do you mean, disappeared? Just that, all three vanished the same night. No explanation, no bodies found. The hospital director ordered all mention of the case removed from official records. But why keep Harper's notes? Walter's voice dropped to a whisper. They didn't. Whatever you found wasn't supposed to exist. As I left the records room, a peculiar sensation washed over me, like being watched from every direction. In the corridor, a nurse I didn't recognize stopped abruptly upon seeing me. Her face registered shock. "Are you all right?" I asked. She backed away. "Your eyes." I rushed to the nearest bathroom and stared at my reflection. My eyes appeared normal, hazel, as they'd always been. But for a moment, just as I turned away, I thought I glimpsed something else in the mirror. Cloudy white eyes with pinpoint pupils, watching me from my own face. And you, have you ever experienced something similar? Let us know in the comments. That night, I couldn't bring myself to return to my apartment. The notepad, the dream, the momentary distortion in my reflection, coincidences perhaps, but disquieting ones. I checked into the Parkview Hotel downtown, telling myself I needed distance from both the file and my apartment. The hotel room was generically comforting, with its floral wallpaper and firm mattress. I placed Thomas Bell's file in the room safe and took a hot shower, letting water wash away the day's unease. Rationality would prevail. I was a doctor, a man of science. Whatever happened to Bell, Harper, and Reynolds in 1921 had a logical explanation. I called the front desk for a wake-up call, then settled into bed. Sleep came surprisingly easily. The ringing telephone jolted me awake. Darkness still filled the room. "Hello? This is your wake-up call." I squinted at the bedside clock. 3:17 m. There's been a mistake. I requested 7. A pause. You're needed back at the hospital, Dr. Lawrence. Who is this? They found something in the walls. The line went dead. I switched on the lamp and dialed the front desk. Front desk, how may I help you? Did someone just call my room? No, sir. No calls have been directed to your room tonight. My hand trembled as I replaced the receiver. I considered trying to sleep again, but knew it was futile. Instead, I retrieved Bell's file from the safe and spread the contents across the bed. There had to be something I'd missed, some explanation for what was happening. I examined the photograph again. In the low light of the hotel lamp, new details emerged. The two blurred doctors in the background weren't moving when the picture was taken. Their features were deliberately smudged, as if someone had taken an eraser to their faces. And Thomas Bell's eyes. I could have sworn they were looking in a different direction than before, no longer at the camera, but towards something out of frame. The last page of Harper's notes, the one that cut off mid-sentence, now had a faint continuation visible in the lamplight, as if written in invisible ink that had partially developed. Patient manifested previously undocumented symptoms last night. Dr. Reynolds and I witnessed corporeal distortion beyond anatomical possibility. Subject's skeletal structure appeared to shift beneath skin, reconfiguring into something neither human nor animal. Reynolds believes subject is host to something not catalogued by medical science. I fear he may be right. We've decided to... The text faded to nothing. I flipped the page over, held it at different angles to the light, but found nothing more. A sharp knock at my door made me jump. Dr. Lawrence? The muffled voice was unfamiliar. I approached cautiously. Who is it? Hospital administration. We need to discuss patient number 437. I hadn't told anyone where I was staying. I remained silent, backing away from the door. We know you have the file, Dr. Lawrence. The voice was closer now, as if the speaker's mouth was pressed against the crack between door and frame. It wants to be completed. Leave or I'll call the police. A long silence followed. Then, look out your window, doctor. Against my better judgment, I parted the curtains. My hotel room was on the 7th floor, facing an alley. Standing directly across from my window, impossibly suspended in midair, was a figure. The distance and darkness obscured details, but I could make out the silhouette of a thin, elongated head and the dim reflection of pinpoint pupils. I stumbled backward, heart pounding. When I gathered the courage to look again seconds later, the figure was gone. But on the window glass, visible from the inside, were handprints that hadn't been there before, small, like a child's, but with fingers too long and jointed in the wrong places. I didn't sleep again. At first light, I checked out of the hotel and drove straight to Holloway Hospital, the file secure in my briefcase. I needed answers, and there was only one person who might provide them. Nurse Collins was organizing medication in the dispensary when I found her. We need to talk about Thomas Bell. She froze, then carefully set down the pill tray she was holding. Not here. She led me to a small courtyard where patients sometimes took their recreation. It was empty at this early hour. You should have left it alone, Dr. Lawrence. She wouldn't meet my eyes. What happened in 1921? The real story. She sighed. I was only a junior nurse then, fresh out of training. Thomas Bell wasn't like other patients. His condition, it spread like a disease. Not exactly. She finally looked at me, her eyes hard with remembered fear. People who spent time with him changed, slowly at first. Mood alterations, unusual dreams, then physical changes, subtle ones. Like what? Slight alterations in facial structure, changes in eye color. Dr. Reynolds was the first to show symptoms. Harper documented everything against the director's orders. And they all disappeared. She nodded. The night of September 4th, I was on duty. Bell had been sedated after an episode. Reynolds went to check on him at midnight. Harper followed an hour later when neither returned. By morning rounds, all 3 beds were empty. They couldn't just vanish. The hospital was searched thoroughly. Nothing but... She hesitated. What? The walls in Belle's room. When they tore out the plaster during renovation in '37, they found drawings inside, hundreds of them, covering the wooden slats beneath. All identical, sketches of a creature with an elongated head and white eyes. The workers who found them all requested transfers the next day. One quit medicine entirely. I thought of the phone call. They found something in the walls. Do you know what's happening to me, Nurse Collins? The dreams, the phone calls, the reflections. Her expression softened with pity. It's starting for you too. You've connected with him somehow. Through the file, the photograph. That's impossible. So was Thomas Bell. Before I could respond, an orderly rushed into the courtyard. Nurse Collins, Dr. Lawrence, the director wants to see you both immediately. The hospital director, Dr. Victor Fleming, was a stern man in his 60s with a reputation for rigid adherence to protocol. His office featured dark wood paneling and smelled perpetually of pipe tobacco. When we entered, he was standing behind his desk, face grave. I understand you've taken an interest in an old case, Dr. Lawrence. Yes, sir, Thomas Bell, 1921. He nodded. And you've removed hospital property, specifically Dr. Harper's notes. They were misfiled, practically abandoned. I intended to return them after what? Publishing them, exposing what happened. His tone surprised me. There was fear beneath the anger. I just want to understand what happened. Fleming sank into his chair. Nobody understands what happened. That's the problem. He opened a drawer and removed a small leather journal, sliding it across the desk toward me. This was found in the hospital attic during renovations last year. It belongs to Dr. Reynolds. My hands trembled as I opened it. The handwriting was cramped, desperate. I read aloud, April 19th, 1921. I can feel him in my mind when I sleep. The boy, or whatever uses the boy as its vessel. Harper doesn't believe me yet, thinks it's research fatigue. But I know what I saw. When I pressed my stethoscope to Bell's chest yesterday, I heard multiple heartbeats, arrhythmic and alien. When I looked up, he was smiling, not with his mouth, but with his eyes. And I understood something terrible. Thomas Bell is not a patient, he's a door. Fleming reclaimed the journal. Whatever you're experiencing, Doctor. Lawrence, it will escalate. The file is a connection. You need to sever it. How? Destroy it completely before you start seeing him while you're awake. Too late, I thought but didn't say. Nurse Collins spoke up. What if that makes it worse? What if destroying the file just releases it fully? Fleming's face darkened. Then God help him, because science can't. I left Fleming's office with my mind reeling. In my pocket, I could feel the edges of the photograph I'd slipped from the file before our meeting. I didn't know why I'd taken it, a compulsion I couldn't explain. As I walked down the corridor toward the staff room, I noticed something odd. Patients stopped their activities to watch me pass. Every head turned in unison. Every pair of eyes tracked my movement. None blinked, none spoke, and in each reflected pupil, I saw the same thing. An impossibly tall, thin figure with an elongated head, walking alongside me where no one stood. I fled the hospital, unable to bear the weight of those stairs any longer. Outside in the parking lot, I sat in my car, hands shaking too badly to insert the key into the ignition. The photograph burned in my pocket like a hot coal. I finally drove to the public library downtown. If Thomas Bell had been a real patient in Kentucky in 1921, there might be records, birth certificates, newspaper articles, anything to ground this nightmare in reality. The rational part of my mind still insisted there must be a logical explanation, even as evidence mounted to the contrary. The library was nearly empty on a weekday afternoon. Miss Abernathy, the head librarian, directed me to the newspaper archives and county records. "Looking for anything in particular, Doctor?" she asked as she unlocked the archive room. "Information about a patient from Kentucky, 1921, Thomas Bell." She paused, key suspended before the lock. "The Bell boy, the one from Harlan County." My heart lurched. "You know of him? My grandmother was a nurse in Kentucky." She mentioned a case. She lowered her voice. "A boy with the wrong face," she called him. "Said the doctors kept him hidden." "Did she say what happened to him?" Miss Abernathy shook her head. "Only that some cases aren't meant to be understood. Some patients aren't meant to be helped." In the archive room, I found nothing under Thomas Bell's name in the birth records for Harlan County. No death certificate either. But in a small local paper, the Harlan Daily Enterprise from February 1921, I found a brief mention. "Local family seeks medical help for afflicted son." The Bell family has departed for Louisville with their son, whose rare condition has puzzled local physicians. "We pray the specialists can help where others could not," Mrs. Bell told this reporter. The nature of the boy's affliction was not disclosed. It wasn't much, but it confirmed Bell's existence beyond Holloway's incomplete records. I continued searching and found another small article from October 1921, "Physicians Missing in Unusual Case." 2 doctors at Holloway Psychiatric Hospital in Louisville have been reported missing since September 5th. Dr. Samuel Harper and Dr. James Reynolds were last seen during evening rounds. Police have found no evidence of foul play. A patient under their care, whose name has been withheld, is also unaccounted for. I photographed both articles with the small camera I'd brought, then continued searching. Nothing more appeared until I checked the Louisville Courier-Journal from December 1937. Renovation halted at psychiatric hospital. Work at Holloway Hospital's East Wing has been temporarily suspended following what officials describe as structural concerns. Sources inside the hospital suggest workers made an unusual discovery within the walls, though hospital administration declined to comment on the nature of the finding. The walls. Just as Nurse Collins had described, as I placed the newspaper back in its folder, I noticed an envelope had fallen to the floor. It was yellowed with age, unmarked except for a wax seal that had long since cracked. Inside was a single sheet of paper, a letter written in a shaky hand. "To whoever finds this account, I write this from a hotel room in Cincinnati. Though I don't expect to remain here long, they will find me eventually." The entity that used the bellboy as its vessel is not confined to physical limitations as we understand them. I alone survived that night in September. Harper did not. Reynolds did not. I watched as Bell, or what Bell had become, absorbed them somehow. There is no other word for it. Their bodies simply folded inward, collapsing into the boy's form like paper being crumpled. I was spared only because I hid, cowering in a supply closet. I heard Bell's footsteps pass my hiding place, heard that unnaturally deep voice whisper, "Soon enough." I fled Holloway that night and have been running since. But I dream of Bell constantly. In each dream, he is closer. In each dream, his form is larger, less human. He is becoming something else, something constructed from all he has absorbed. If you are reading this, you are already connected. He has sensed your interest. It begins with dreams, then reflections. Then the physical changes start. Your eyes will be the first to transform. There is only one way to sever the connection before it's too late. Find what Bell truly is. The answer lies in the original file, the real file, hidden where no one would think to look. Elizabeth Collins, Nurse Collins, the same Collins who worked at Holloway now. Impossible. This letter was from 1937. A relative, perhaps, but the coincidence was too great to ignore. I was so absorbed in the letter that I didn't notice the library had emptied. Even Miss Abernathy was gone. The large wall clock showed 6:42 p.m. after closing time. The lights should have been dimmed, yet they remained bright. As I gathered my materials, I became aware of a rhythmic tapping sound coming from the far corner of the archive room. Tap, tap, tap. Pause. Tap, 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 like fingers drumming on wood. I moved cautiously toward the sound. It emanated from a filing cabinet that looked newer than the others. Tap, tap, tap. I pulled open the drawer, finding it empty except for a small leather-bound book wedged at the back. The journal's cover bore no name. I opened it to find pages of childish drawings, the same elongated figure with white eyes that Nurse Collins had described finding in the hospital walls. But these drawings evolved across pages. The figure grew larger, more detailed, more real. The final page contained no drawing, only words in a child's scrawl. I am the door and what comes through. The tapping had stopped. The library was utterly silent now, that peculiar, heavy silence that feels like a held breath. I turned slowly, somehow knowing what I would see. In the archive room doorway stood a boy. Not Thomas Bell, as he appeared in the photograph, but a normal child of perhaps 10 years old. He wore modern clothes, jeans and a t-shirt. His face was ordinary, unremarkable, except for his eyes, white with pinpoint pupils. "You're looking in the wrong place, Dr. Lawrence." His voice was high, childish. I clutched the journal tightly. "What are you?" He smiled. "I'm what waits. I'm what always waits." For what? For someone curious enough to open the door, like Harper, like Reynolds. He tilted his head unnaturally far to one side. "Like you. I haven't opened any door. You will." The boy's face rippled slightly, features momentarily shifting toward something else before settling again. "That's why I chose you. You need to know. You need to see. You won't be satisfied until you do." He was right. Despite my terror, the need to understand burned inside me like a fever. Where is the real file? The one Nurse Collins mentioned in her letter. The boy's smile widened. She knew. That's why she came back. Came back? Elizabeth Collins didn't die in 1937. She changed her name, waited decades, then returned to Holloway. To watch, to wait, to warn the next one. My mind reeled. Nurse Collins now is the same woman, almost 90 years old, but you'd never know. Time moves differently for those who've glimpsed the other side of the door. The boy took a step forward. I stepped back. "The file is where it's always been, Doctor, hidden in plain sight." He pointed to my pocket. "You already have the key." I felt the photograph pressing against my chest through my shirt pocket. Before I could respond, the archive room door slammed shut, plunging me into darkness. I fumbled for a light switch, finding none. The darkness seemed to pulse, to breathe. A hand touched my shoulder, not a child's hand, but something with too many joints, too many fingers. I screamed and ran blindly, colliding painfully with shelves and cabinets until I found the door. It opened suddenly, spilling me into the brightly lit main library. Miss Abernathy looked up from the front desk, startled. "Dr. Lawrence? I thought you'd left hours ago." The wall clock now read 4:30 p.m. The library was full of patrons, none of whom seemed to notice my disheveled appearance or panicked breathing. The archive room. There was a boy. She frowned. "You were alone in there, Doctor. I've been at this desk all afternoon." I glanced back at the archive room. Through the open door, I could see it was empty, bright with afternoon sunlight. No boy, no journal. But the letter from Elizabeth Collins was still clutched in my hand. I drove straight to Holloway, determined to confront Nurse Collins or Elizabeth Collins, if the boy was to be believed. The photograph in my pocket seemed heavier now, somehow more substantial than paper should be. The hospital corridors were busy with the evening shift change. I headed directly to the nurses' station where Collins was typically stationed. She wasn't there. "Looking for Nurse Collins?" asked a young orderly. "She left early, said she wasn't feeling well." "Where does she live?" He raised an eyebrow. Staff addresses are confidential, Doctor. You know that. I needed to think. If Collins was indeed the same nurse from 1921, she was the only one who might know how to end this. The boy had said I already had the key, the photograph, but key to what? I retreated to my office and locked the door. Removing the photograph, I examined it under my desk lamp. Thomas Bell stared back with those unsettling white eyes. The two blurred doctors stood behind him. Nothing new revealed itself. On a hunch, I turned the photograph over. The back was blank, or appeared to be. Tilting it under the light at different angles, I noticed a faint impression. Someone had written on another piece of paper while it rested on top of this photograph. I grabbed a pencil and lightly shaded over the back of the photo, revealing an address. 1147 Oakwood Lane. It had to be Collins' address. Night had fallen by the time I found the house. A small bungalow on the outskirts of Louisville. A single light burned in what appeared to be the living room. I approached the front door, suddenly uncertain. What exactly did I hope to learn? That I was being haunted by a patient who disappeared over 30 years ago. That somehow Collins had lived far beyond her natural lifespan because of some supernatural encounter. Before I could knock, the door opened. Collins stood there, looking exactly as she always did at the hospital. Neat uniform, practical shoes, hair pulled back in a severe bun, except now, in the dim porch light, I could see the faint traces of what might have been a much younger woman beneath the aging makeup. "I've been expecting you, Dr. Lawrence." Her voice was tired. "You found the letter. Are you Elizabeth Collins? From 1921? She nodded once. "Come inside. Quickly. It's not safe to talk outside after dark." Collins' home was modestly furnished, but contained oddities that immediately caught my attention. The walls were covered with mirrors of various sizes and shapes. Between them hung anatomical drawings of human eyes and optical nerves. On a side table sat a collection of antique medical instruments, scalpels, forceps, and a peculiar device I didn't recognize. "Sit, Dr. Lawrence." She gestured to an armchair positioned directly beneath a large circular mirror mounted on the ceiling. I hesitated but complied. "You're really her." Elizabeth Collins from the 1921 case. She poured 2 cups of tea from a waiting pot. "Yes, though I've had other names in between." "That's impossible. You'd be over 100 years old. 115, to be precise." She handed me a cup. "Time works differently when you've been marked by what came through Thomas Bell." What exactly was Bell? "A patient with an unknown condition," she laughed bitterly. "That's what we told ourselves at first. A medical anomaly, something science could eventually explain." She sat across from me. But Bell wasn't the condition. Bell was the vessel. Vessel for what? Something ancient. Something that exists in the spaces between what we perceive as reality. She stirred her tea methodically. "It needs human hosts to fully enter our world. But the human form is limiting. It distorts the host while trying to accommodate itself. The physical deformities." She nodded. That was just the beginning. The longer it remained in Bell, the more it changed him, and the more it affected those around him, like Harper and Reynolds, and me. She set down her cup and began removing something from her face. Not makeup as I'd thought, but a carefully constructed prosthetic. Beneath it, her skin was unnaturally smooth, her features subtly wrong in ways difficult to pinpoint. I stopped aging the night Bell took the others. I was touched by whatever came through him, but not fully taken. "Why are you still at Holloway after all these years? Don't people notice you don't age?" "I change identities every decade or so. Different name, different appearance." She gestured to the prosthetics on a nearby table. "I stay because someone needs to watch, to warn others when it starts again." "When what starts again?" "The cycle. It needs new vessels periodically, new doors to open wider." She leaned forward. "It chose you this time, Dr. Lawrence, just as it chose Harper before." A chill ran through me. Why me? The curious ones, the ones who need to understand, who won't stop until they do. She pointed to the photograph in my hand. "That's not just a picture, it's a connection, a tether. The longer you possess it, the stronger its hold becomes. What does it want? To fully manifest in our reality. It's been trying for centuries, using different hosts. Belle was the closest it came." She stood and walked to a bookshelf, removing an ancient leather volume. This journal belonged to a 16th century physician who documented a similar case in Vienna. Same physical characteristics, same effect on those who studied the patient. She opened the book to reveal illustrations nearly identical to those I'd seen in the library, the elongated figure with white eyes. "It's patient, Dr. Lawrence. It waits until someone suitable opens the way. Then it begins, the transformation." My mouth went dry. Transformation of what? Reality itself. She returned to her seat. "What do you think you've been experiencing? The inconsistent time, the shifting reflections, the appearances and disappearances. The boundaries are already thinning around you. I thought of the library, how it had emptied in an instant, the boy appearing and vanishing, the clock jumping back 2 hours. How do I stop it? You can't stop it, but you can close the door before it fully opens." She pointed to the photograph again. "That's the anchor. As long as it exists, the connection remains, so I destroy it. It's not that simple. The image itself is just a manifestation. You need to find the source, the original file, the real one." "Where?" She rose and moved to a grandfather clock against the far wall. Reaching inside the case, she removed a thin folder yellowed with age. Harper created 2 sets of notes, one official, documenting what the hospital administration would accept. One true, recording what he actually observed. He hid the real file the night before he disappeared. She handed me the folder. Inside was a single sheet of paper, Harper's handwriting, but more frantic than in the other notes. "Belle is gone. What wears his skin now is something else entirely. It speaks through him sometimes, a voice like gravel and broken glass. It told me what it wants, what it has always wanted since the first moment of creation. A way in, a door that never closes. The photograph is the key. Reynolds didn't understand what would happen when he captured Belle's image on film. Somehow the entity used that moment, that chemical reaction of light and silver, to create a tether between realities. Anyone who possesses the photograph eventually becomes like Belle, a door. There is only one way to sever the connection. The entity is bound to the image through Belle's eyes. They must be rendered unseeing." The note ended there. I looked up at Collins, confused. "Render the eyes unseeing? What does that mean?" She opened a drawer and removed a small box. Inside lay an antique scalpel with an ivory handle. In the original file, Harper included detailed anatomical drawings of Belle's eyes. That's what the entity didn't want recorded, the specific structure of the eyes that allowed it to create the tether. She lifted the scalpel. "The only way to break the connection is to destroy the eyes in the photograph, not just mark them out, surgically excise them from the paper itself." I stared at the scalpel, then at the photograph. That's absurd. How could cutting up a photograph possibly... Because it's not just a photograph, Dr. Lawrence. She placed the scalpel in my hand. The paper contains cellular material from Belle himself. The entity ensured part of its vessel remained in the image, creating a biological connection to whoever possesses it. It sounded impossible, yet after everything I'd experienced, could I really dismiss it? If I do this, it ends. All of it. For you, yes. Until it finds someone else. Someone else curious enough to seek out what science tried to hide. I placed the photograph on her coffee table and positioned the scalpel over one of Belle's white eyes. My hand trembled. "Do it quickly," Collins urged. "It knows what you're attempting." As if in response, the lights flickered. The temperature in the room plummeted suddenly. I could see my breath forming clouds in the air. I pressed the scalpel's point into the right eye of the photograph. The paper resisted strangely, feeling thicker and more fibrous than ordinary photographic stock. As I began to cut, a high-pitched keening filled the room. Not a sound heard with ears, but felt in the bones and teeth. The mirrors throughout the room began to vibrate. In their reflections, I saw not Collins' living room, but a vast, impossible space filled with elongated figures, all with white pinpoint eyes, all reaching toward the glass as if trying to break through. "Hurry!" Collins shouted over the noise. I removed the right eye, carving a neat circle through the photograph. The keening intensified. The mirrors cracked simultaneously, jagged lines spreading across their surfaces. As I positioned the scalpel over the left eye, the photograph began to change beneath my hands. The paper writhed, the image of Belle distorting. His mouth, previously closed in the photograph, opened impossibly wide, stretching beyond human anatomical constraints. I plunged the scalpel into the remaining eye just as the mirrors shattered, sending glass shards flying throughout the room. The photograph burst into flames beneath my hands. I dropped it, watching as it curled and blackened in seconds, leaving only ash. Silence fell. The temperature returned to normal. Collins stood frozen, staring at something behind me. I turned slowly. In the corner of the room stood the boy from the library, normal features, white eyes. But now his form wavered, transparency pulsing through him like heartbeats. Not gone, Dr. Lawrence, never gone. Just waiting. He smiled, teeth too numerous and sharp. There are other photographs. His form dissipated like smoke, leaving nothing but a faint whisper. There are always more doors. Collins sank into her chair. It worked. The connection is severed. For now, what did it mean that there are other photographs? She looked at me with exhaustion etched across her features. Belle wasn't the first vessel, or the last. Throughout history, it has found ways to create tethers, cave paintings, sculptures, daguerreotypes, photographs. Different technologies, same purpose. I thought of the countless images created daily in the modern world, the endless potential doors. We can't possibly find and destroy them all. No, we can only close the doors we discover. She gestured to the medical instruments on her table. That's what I've spent my extended lifetime doing. Finding those who've been connected, helping them sever the tether before the transformation completes. Is it over for me, then? She studied my face intently. Look in the mirror. Only one small mirror remained intact, a hand mirror on a side table. I lifted it and examined my reflection. My eyes had returned to their normal hazel color. But around my pupils, barely perceptible, was a thin ring of white. Not entirely, she said softly. You've glimpsed the other side. You're marked by it, as I am. You'll notice things others don't. See movements at the edges of your vision. Hear whispers in empty rooms. For how long? The rest of your life? She smiled sadly. Which may be considerably longer than you expected. I left Collins' house just before dawn, the remains of Harper's true file and the scalpel secure in my briefcase. She'd insisted I take them, saying I would need them someday. For the next one, she'd said, there's always a next one. The drive back to my apartment felt surreal. The world looked exactly as it always had, yet fundamentally different. I noticed things now. How shadows sometimes moved independently of their casters, how reflective surfaces occasionally showed something other than what stood before them. At home, I burned Harper's file in my kitchen sink, watching the paper blacken and curl just as the photograph had. When nothing remained but ash, I washed it down the drain. I considered burning this account as well. These pages you're reading now. Perhaps I should have, But some part of me, the curious part that drew the entity's attention in the first place, needs this record to exist, needs someone else to know what science tried to hide about Thomas Bell. I returned to work at Holloway the following day. Nurse Collins was there as usual, no acknowledgement of our night passing between us. Life resumed its normal rhythm, or a close approximation of it. Occasionally, I see patients with unusual eyes, not fully white, but with that same thin ring around the pupil that now marks my own. I watch them carefully. Some show other signs, slight elongation of features, whispered conversations with empty air. For these patients, I create 2 sets of notes, one official, one true. Last week, a new patient arrived, a young boy from Harlan County, Kentucky. His parents reported behavioral changes following his discovery of an old photograph in their attic. His eyes have begun to change. I've requested to be his primary physician. Collins has been assigned as his nurse. The scalpel waits in my office drawer. I fear we'll need it soon, but I must end this account now. It's getting late, and the mirror on my office wall has begun to ripple, like the surface of disturbed water. Something waits on the other side, something with white, pinpoint eyes that never blink, something that knows I'm writing about it. If you want to hear more whispers from the darkness, follow this channel. The next story may be closer than you imagine.